Hello, hello, and welcome to the Hay Book Festival, the Hay Book Festival Book Club. I hope you're all having a very fantastic evening. We've got a very exciting evening, evening's conversation lined up for you. There's a few things that I have to do as the chair, a bit of housekeeping. So I've got to read stuff out. So I hope you don't mind. Bear with me. Okay. Hay Festival is a charity with year-round activities to connect audiences with artists. Thank you to everyone for their continued support and engagement. And I've been told that we have a very engaged audience who continually show up for the book club. So I hope you enjoy this evening's book, which is Anansi's Gold by Yepi Yeboah. Sorry, her name's Yepoka, but I'm calling her Yepi tonight. Um, Anansi's Gold is the Hay Festival Book Club pick for September. Copies are available for purchase on the Hay Festival website, or you can buy a copy from your local bookseller. Hay Book Festival, Hay Festival Book Club, sorry, Hay Festival Book Club is supported by Unwin Charitable Trust, and you can find past events available to rewatch free online now. Our October selection will be Shirley Jackson's The Haunting of Hill House. That is Shirley Jackson's The Haunting of Hill House, which I'm very excited to read as well. So let's circle back to tonight's interview. And as I said, I'm talking to Yepi Yeboah, and her book is just wonderful. I'm just the headlines are, it is just wonderful. And I hope some of you, or all of you who are watching this, have read it. It's one of those books, I have to say, that wouldn't normally read because I don't generally read um, non-fiction unless I'm doing research. But this book captured my imagination in a way that is really rare and very difficult to do for a writer of nonfiction to do, I think. For those of you who don't know what the book's about, I'm going to ask Yepi to give me the elevator pitch very soon. But I'm very excited about this chat because there is so much going on in the book. There is so much she deals with, and she brings up lots of topics of conversation. And part of it, I think, it shows how a con can be carried out for so long, mainly because of people's biases and prejudices and the way that people see, particularly Africa and Ghana. So let me first of all introduce Yepi. If you wouldn't mind introducing yourself, telling us something about yourself, and whilst you're telling me about yourself, if you could think of the answer to this question, if you were about to be, if you were caught with a can of spray paint, about to write a bit of graffiti on a wall, what would it be and what colour paint would it be? So, Yeppy, do tell us about yourself. I do like to throw people at the start of an interview because it helps you to relax, I hope you think.
Yeah. Now I'm start thinking of that. Um, Hi, I'm so glad to be here and I'm so excited to have this conversation. My name is Yepi Yeebo. Yeboah is the more common Ghanaian name. I just happen to have the most
Sorry.
obscure version possible. No, no worries at all. Um, and which is kind of handy because obscure things is what I love to do. And I think that's the fact about myself that I am very obsessive about obscure details, and I will spend days, weeks, months chasing them down. To the point where my friends will regularly have to hold interventions to be like, please stop researching this and sit down and write the book you are contractually obligated to write. Um, if I was caught with a can of spray paint, it would probably be kind of like the color of your jumper, like hot pink, and really, really bright. And I think I would be writing "You Are Here." Um, and that's what I would put like in the bits of my like documents and manuscripts when I was done for the day and I wanted to find where I left off really quickly. But it was also like a really, really good reminder that I am here in the story, but I am also here in the world, and I am also here for a purpose.
That's a wonderful thing to type, I think. Can you tell us a bit about your background? You're a journalist, I know. Can you tell us a bit about that? How long you've been a journalist for, and what sort of publications you've worked for?
Yeah. I have been a journalist for, oh my goodness, really weird to say this because it's like 15 years, but I did internships like while I was still in undergraduate and stuff like that. So it feels like I've been a journalist for way longer. Um, I did internships at Ghanaian newspapers and at Newsweek magazine back in the day. And I also worked at like Time, Business Insider. I've written for The Guardian, for Bloomberg Business Week, and I mostly write about um, finance, crime, and development in West Africa.
All in one go.
Usually all in one go. Usually it's all connected. Usually there's a bit of each.
Okay. Where did you grow up?
I grew up mostly in North London. I was born in Moscow, and when the Berlin Wall fell, we moved to London where my dad was in exile. And so I grew up in Tottenham. Yeah. And I went to school here, and for uni, I stayed in London, which is very unadventurous of me. And I did my master's at Columbia in New York.
Fantastic. And currently live in London, don't you?
Yeah, I still live in Tottenham.
Okay. So can you briefly give us an outline of what the book is about?
Yeah. Anansi's Gold is about a man named John Blame Meza who managed to convince hundreds of people that he was the heir to a secret fortune hidden away by Ghana's first president, President Kwame Nkrumah. And this fortune was locked up in Swiss banks behind a very complicated contract. So he needed money to fulfill the terms of that contract. And so if you gave him an investment, he could promise you 10 to 1, sometimes 100 to 1 um, on your investment, and you would be getting that money back almost instantly. It would be weeks or months. At the worst, it would be years. And he had takers in Philadelphia initially, in Ghana, here, all over Europe, even as far as South Korea and Japan.
Okay. Um, Now, my first question, actually, one of the audience has already asked this question as well. So I'm going to ask it and tell you what his question was. So, why did you choose to write this book about this man? And Theo, who's in the audience, his question was, what first grabbed you about John Ake Blamio's story?
The first thing that grabbed me about the story, a really good question. And I think it was that I first encountered it in a WhatsApp message from my mum. She sent me a little clip of the 60-minute segment of Blameza from about 1988. And he was sitting on like a reproduction Lucans chair that they called a throne. And he was saying like this wealth was put away by our ancestors. And then the host, Ed Bradley, came on and said he actually told people it was from Kwame Nkrumah. And um, the message was like, do you think what he's saying is true? And initially I was like, it's patently a scam. That's absurd. Why would this random person have access to a colossal fortune? And this random person with no like ostensible connections to Kwame Nkrumah. And also ages ago I'd done some research and I was lucky enough to go and see Kwame Nkrumah's papers at Howard University in Washington, D.C. And I saw his will. It was incredibly modest. There were no billions like stashed away. There were no billions evident anywhere. But then I kept thinking about it because like it wasn't a ridiculous question. Like Ghana has a great deal of wealth. It was literally called the Gold Coast for a huge chunk of the colonial era. And my granddad used to do the speech where it was like Ghana has everything. It has gold, it has aluminium, it has manganese, it has fertile soil. And the other part of that is that none of that wealth and none of the proceeds of that wealth is like none of that is really evident in Ghana. There's still a crushing and unspeakable amount of poverty that just doesn't make sense for a country that's produced this much wealth. And so like it was a nagging question for me as well, because like, where is all that money? And then I like tell people this crazy story I'd found, and all of them, like, I tell my friends, and all of them would have stories of either politicians stashing away ridiculous sums of money, like in the walls of their house, in boats, in crazy places, or people losing large sums of money, um, and and their families not being able to like trace it in any way, shape, or form. Or there was a period of time where Nigeria got really, really good at reclaiming money politicians had hidden away in Swiss banks. And so I was like, huh, there's clearly something here. Yeah, I think it was that question that first made me want to dig around. Like, he hit on something that's like vital and important and needs an answer.
Yeah. How long ago was it that your mum sent you the WhatsApp message?
This was 2016.
So 8 years ago.
Yeah,
The
wow.
reason I'm asking that is because it's a it's a really, really involved story. And you have so much research in it, and you have so much stuff that is referenced. It's nothing is ever just mentioned and glossed over. You know, you have quotes from the papers and the documents. Some of the documents, I do wonder how you got hold of them because they're the sort of things that I know that the colonizers would never love anybody to see, the things that they got up to. So how long did it take you to write this book?
About 6 years. Um, and the funny thing is, um, that I intended it to be like a crime caper, this very enjoyable story about this like incredibly suave con man who ran this really, really, really audacious scheme and like ultimately got away with it. And it's like glamorous, and I get to be in the 60s and the 70s and 80s. I was gonna have a great time. And then I at the very early stages went to look something really basic up. I think I was looking for a biography of General Achampong, who was the first leader that Blay really takes in. And I found some stuff from like the 70s, from when he first became like military leader. And then maybe like I think there was like a New York Times clip about his daughter who lived in New York, and his grandson who became like a like successful football player. And that was it. And I was like, it's just really weird that I can't find something about this person who was leader of Ghana for a very long period of time. And I was like, this has to be a mistake. There has to be more stuff that I'm finding, that I'm not finding. And there wasn't anything. And so I'd end up having to go and look at primary sources to get very basic information. And so it started off with like newspapers and diplomatic cables and stuff like that. But then I was digging through the most delightfully obscure documents. And I'm not going to say I didn't thoroughly enjoy all of that because I really did, but I did not anticipate having to personally look up a primary source for every bit of information I intended to include in the book. Like it was maddeningly difficult. Like as much as I enjoyed the treasure hunt of trying to like track down an account of a looting of a specific like kingdom in Western Ghana, it took so much time and so much effort and so much bothering archivists and librarians and people. Um, and I didn't see it coming, and it was one of the hardest bits of writing this book.
So how much time did you spend researching? How much was writing? Was it about a year's worth of writing and 5 years of research?
It was 6 years of research. I was researching when we were in copy edits. I was researching like towards the end. I had to be like restrained from adding any more information to, to the book Because every time somebody had a question for me, I was like, "Ooh, you know what I should go look up? This thing that is not remotely important, but might shed some light on this very, very precise thing that the copy editor would like to know." And I think I just have a problem. I'm just addicted to research and to the treasure hunt. And so I'd say it was maybe it was this was interrupted by the pandemic. So obviously there was a period of time where I couldn't go anywhere, and all my research was like begging libraries to loan a copy of something or to send me like a photocopy of a document that for some reason is only available in Paris. But I think I researched the entire time and I wrote drafts, but they were all very raggedy until about the last 3 years when they started to take form. Yeah.
Did you spend a lot of time in Ghana, America? Where did you go to research it? Did you travel the world basically researching this book?
I would have if the pandemic hadn't
Pandemic, yes, I forgot
intervened.
about that. That sort of interrupted a lot of people's stuff, didn't it?
Yeah, but I did manage to go to Ghana a few times and to the States a few times. So I spent a lot of time in Accra and Philadelphia doing research, which was a great deal of fun because I got to like talk to people who were involved and like see his old haunts and just meet lots and lots of really wonderful people and just the serendipity of being in Accra and in Philadelphia, um, like just being there helped me find stuff. Like I would overhear someone having a conversation. I was in a library looking for clips of a like an old newspaper that was out of print. And it was like the morgue of the newspaper. So it was their clips, which were like literally cut out of a newspaper and then stuck in a box. And you'd have to go through like crumbling bits of paper to find it. And as I was doing this like very arduous thing, I heard someone mention one of the characters in the book, one of Blaine Mays' investors, just completely randomly in passing. And that man turned out to be a good friend of this investor I had been trying to track down, but he had also done some research into this on behalf of his friend. So he had like a bunch of clips and a bunch of information that he'd found out that he was like incredibly generous about sharing with me.
So
And
you
that
just go running up to him and go, "I'm doing research on that on this for a book."
Yeah, I just said I sorry, like very apologetically, I was eavesdropping on your conversation because I was bored and I've been here for 6 hours and I overheard you mention I think the character, yeah, this was Ben Bynum and I like explained who I was and why I was interested. And people were oddly receptive to me being that nosy. Um, and that presumptuous. And I am thankful for that because I found a great deal of stuff by just being in places.
Okay, did you speak to any of his family or his descendants or any of the other people who, I mean, apart from this guy, obviously, who you found randomly in the library, did you speak to people, his family? So
Yeah, I spoke to several members of his family.
he had 14 children by the time he died.
He did, yeah.
That's pretty impressive.
It is pretty impressive. He did everything in grand style.
Yes, he
Like when
did.
he did something, he did not do it like small scale. If he was gonna have children, he was gonna have children. Um, so yeah, I spoke to some of his relatives, his children. I spoke to his ex-wife. And I
Oh, she's
spoke
still
to
alive.
she is, yeah, Auntie Anna, who is in the book quite a bit,
The
is
American one.
this is the Ghanaian one.
Grace. Oh, is she not called Grace in the book? Oh, sorry, I got completely wrong way around. Okay,
Yeah,
yes, his
yeah.
wife. Yes, okay, yeah.
And she, yeah, sorry, Gladys, sorry,
Alice, yes.
yes, um, yeah, and she is like an entire character in her own right and has had
Oh,
like a
yeah, she's
fantastic
fantastic.
life, like even after all of this. Yeah, and everybody was very guarded, for obvious reasons. There is still thought to be a great deal of money at stake here, but also as a result, the family had been kind of bombarded over the years. Like first by people thinking they had money, then by people rejecting them, then by people thinking they had money. So I think it is still a delicate topic for them, and I don't think they were super thrilled with me poking around um, in this like very, very delicate part of their family's history. Um,
But they
yeah.
still kind of engage with you. So you managed to must have managed to find a way to talk to them and to communicate with them.
Um, yeah. I I think they also kind of want the story out, and also they had remarkable and also incredibly difficult experiences. Like they got to live this incredible life, but then it all disappeared. And they faced like a great deal of difficulty. Like overnight, they had to fend for themselves all of a sudden. And like they have each had remarkable lives, like separate from all of this, but also like in part because of all of this. Um, and it felt like everybody I spoke to sort of had their own story and had their own book inside them. Um, and they wanted to share that in one way or another and find ways to talk about John Ackerblay Mazer and what he meant. Because as complicated as he was, like they loved him a great deal,
Yeah.
like
That's one of my
fiercely.
next questions, actually. I wanted to say, did you feel conflicted at all? Because at the beginning of the book, it's very much, you feel very much that you have a real affection for him. But as time goes on, it feels like you start to see him, you, the writer, the person who's telling the story, you start to see him very much as he was. And he was a con man. He wasn't. And he did, arguably quite a lot of harm. But then he could only do that because of the way people see Africa and Ghana and this shrouded in this mysticism and it's we're savages, but then we've got all this wealth and we're somewhere that people want to go and plunder. Whether it's overtly or quietly, they want to go and take this stuff that's not theirs, basically. So, how did you feel about him, or did your feelings change as you wrote about him, as you got to know more about him?
So I did when I did research, I also sort of wrote through the research as a rough draft. And so as I discovered stuff and my feelings changed, I think that sort of becomes is clear in the narrative.
Yes.
And so like as I realized that this wasn't just like a fun crime caper and he had decided to bend history to his will to stand up a con, and that he was involved in increasingly like destructive relationships with powerful people. Like it was all fun and games when he was like escaping like police custody through a toilet and showing up in Philadelphia all dapper. Um, but but then when like the arms dealers show up and when he's propping up like military leaders and he is willing to make deals with um increasingly more shady characters, it started to get uh it started to get harder to enjoy and harder to root for him and for the con.
Yeah.
Um, because it became evident that like instead of just like getting one over on rich people, he was just feeding off of this desire people had to plunder in this very like fancy way, but he was just promising people Ghanaian wealth, the Ghanaian money, and the ability to go to Ghana and build a monorail and make an absolute fortune.
Mm.
Um, yeah. And also I don't think I fully appreciated like I knew the details of Ghana's history and what had happened, but I never had to like go and look up like the police reports and first-hand accounts. And I also did not expect Blameza to be like there at the scene of the crime so many times. Um, it's almost like Forrest Gumpy that he
Yeah,
shows up
yeah,
at,
he was there all the time in these different historical events,
yeah, at all these like
constantly
pivotal
there.
moments. Like power brokering and like hanging around influential people and furthering this con, which again made it seem like there was something real here because otherwise, why would he be there? Um, yeah, I didn't appreciate how much he wove himself into current events and sort of into Ghana's history and
Yes.
how far his lies stretched and how much they still hold even today.
Yeah, it's really weird actually, because like you say, he is like Forrest Gump, almost like he shows up at all these pivotal moments. But when I started reading the book, I actually talked to my mum, who is from Ghana, about it, and she doesn't remember him at all. Weirdly, because I
Yeah.
remember when I mean, try not to age myself too much, but I remember the first Rawlings' first coup, and I remember my parents talking about it, ringing all their friends and talking about it on the phone with, because it was before WhatsApp. So they were all talking about it at the time and being very excited, but also quite scared and about what it meant for Ghana because we were in England, obviously. Um, but she doesn't remember him at all. But he is there all the time. He's in all the official documents doing this thing, running this con. That's this long running con for 20 odd years, which is pretty incredible that but people don't remember him. Like you've almost like pulled this person out of history and put him back into the history books, almost dusted him off. So he's like no longer this gap in Ghana's history, which is very quite incredible, I think.
Thank you.
Some parts of the book read a lot like scenes from Hustle, and that, like you said, you started off wanting to write that type of book. Hustle's the BBC One program where there's the people who sort of like they're con artists, but then they kind of got a heart of gold, and he didn't really have a heart of gold. That he was charming, but he wasn't as well. So um, but they do say a lot in Hustle. You can't con an honest person. And do you think that's true, having written this book?
Oh, completely. Um, One of the like toughest things towards the end of my research was like I was looking at all the numbers for like how much Blake Mazur is said to have made from investors, how much he told them was in the fund, and the numbers changed all the time. But also, I had found this random clip in a Philadelphia newspaper. It was like a financial column where people wrote in with their problems, and it was about like a company that was associated with Robert Ellis, who was sort of the other side of the con.
Yeah,
Um, and the person who wrote in was asking if they could write off their investment in this random company. And then as I was looking through like court documents, it became clear that a lot of people overstated how much they had invested with Blame so they could write it off. Um, and so, especially at the end, everybody was running a con. Um, every single person involved. And in in the beginning, I think a lot of them thought they were getting one over on Blameza, who would like appear wearing like traditional wear, and often he just wouldn't say anything because he'd have an orator do that for him because he was supposed to be royalty, and that's what happens. And I think a lot of people thought they were maybe getting one over on this Rube. Um,
yeah,
and he would hold back information about how worldly he was and how experienced he was until it was absolutely necessary to for people to know it. Basically, so he'd be underestimated until it was too late, which is brilliant and devastating at the same time because he knew exactly how to use people's people's ideas and prejudices against them.
Yeah.
Um, and sorry, I've lost my train of thought.
No, we were just talking
Um,
about the con. You can't con an honest person.
yes, yeah, yeah, yeah. And so like clearly a lot of people thought they were getting one over on a rube. There were a group of investors who were genuinely there to sort of build connections between like communities in Philly and communities in Ghana and
Yeah,
actually like develop things together. A lot of them were like very early stage investors and a lot of them were African American and there was like a real sense of community and family with this group of investors. And I think this is like the early stage of the con where it really did feel like he had a heart of gold, or at least that he'd gotten in over his head and he was trying to make good, and trying to make some part of it true, like find enough money or enough power to like satisfy what he had promised these investors. And with these investors, it wasn't like so much about like the returns they'd be making, although that was a part. Like they would be building stuff, they would be growing stuff, they would be like forging these like links between like Philly and Western Ghana, where Blake Mesa was from. And I think there was like an amount of idealism there, but then you'd have to like even in the best version of that, you'd have to sort of ignore the fact that you'd be taking a cut of money that was taken from Ghana. And even if it is like it's just the interest, it doesn't matter. There's so much of it. It's still money that belongs to someone else, to other people.
yeah,
Um, yeah. And so I think there were varying degrees of honesty involved. And some of it was so there were lots and lots and lots of like rumors and stories about how some of the money came from organized crime and how some of the investors basically couldn't give up on Blameza and couldn't leave London because if they did, they'd be like in trouble with like the mob in Detroit or the mob in Philly. There were like stories like that. Um, but yeah, I think there were varying degrees of honesty and dishonesty involved.
yeah.
But to get involved in the first place, you had to be comfortable with taking something that wasn't yours and taking it for a song as well.
And taking it from people who needed it more than you did a lot of the time. That was the thing. It was taking it from Ghanaians who you knew were going through a really hard time. And I think that's for me, that was one of the things that made me feel most conflicted about the whole thing was because on one hand it's quite funny and it's a good story. On the other hand, the people who were suffering were the people who had nothing and who'd had everything taken from them constantly and who had all these resources, natural resources that they should be living off. And they weren't because there were terrible people at every stage who were wanting
Yeah.
to rob them of stuff. One of the things that I found really fascinating, and we were talking about it just before, is the whole psychology of once you've fallen for a con, once you're there in the con, you want to stay in the con for some reason. People, as it's very clear in the book, and we can see it around us, I think, people can find out the truth about something, but will still constantly be hanging on. So people knew that this sum of money didn't exist. I mean, I'm just going to call it. I don't think it exists. I think it was all a ruse, a very sophisticated, but this ruse. And he people became aware of it, and they were told this. But rather than sort of going right, okay, I'm going to cut my losses, as they call it, the sunken
The
cost
cost
fallacy,
fallacy, yeah.
and cognitive dissonance, where you just, well, I've put everything in it now. I might as well carry on down this road. Did you find that really fascinating or quite scary?
So the like weirdest thing about talking to people who were directly involved um was that even now they are still like true believers. And so I even spoke to investors who had like completely washed their hands away, written off their investments in like the late 70s, had nothing to do with it anymore, like expected to like never see a penny of anything. And they would be like, he was a crook, he was a charlatan, everything that came out of his mouth was a lie. However, and then they tell me a story about like an experience they had that convinced them that there was something there. Like there was an investor who was like a pretty prominent businessman in Philadelphia who like written his investment off long, long ago. And then uh, at some point after that, he was like a party near the UN, full of like swanky people. And he mentioned this like crazy investment he'd made to someone. And another person who was there, who was like an ex-British politician who was involved in finance, apparently muttered, and they'll never see a penny of that money. Uh, and like from that minute on, he was like, it exists. And I think a, a lot of them had had experiences like that where there was like a kernel of truth or confirmation of everything they'd been through and everything they'd seen and everything they'd heard. And despite the fact that Boy Mason may have had a con man, he hit on something. And like they're right, he did. Like there is there are colossal sums of money missing from Ghana.
Mm,
And there is an insane amount of wealth that was like extracted from the country and is not evident there in any way. And everybody is like, where is it? And it's really abstract to think, well, like the gold went to a vault and then it got like processed into other gold and it's in a treasury, or like, well, the money from the aluminium was used to build like a bank that is somewhere in like the Midwest now. Like the way wealth like flowed out of Ghana over the centuries was so like diffuse and complex that it's hard to say in a concrete way like it was stolen, it
mm,
was used to enrich another country, and now that country has roads and you don't.
yes.
And also it's deeply, deeply like gut-wrenchingly awful to hear like it was stolen and
Yeah.
used to enrich another country, and now that country has like cancer care and you don't.
Yes. That's what actually brings me on to my next point. For me, the most shocking thing I found was that the colonizers were willing to go the lengths they were willing to go to keep Ghana, to keep Ghana's wealth, to steal it and then transport it and then use it for their own thing. And at any point there was any type of sniff of, oh, we want our money back, or could you just possibly send us, run me my money because you've been keeping it. The lengths they would go to, the things that they would do. I was so, I mean, I knew it was bad, but I didn't actually realize that to this day, they're still doing it. They're still doing the things they can to keep hold of someone else's wealth. And so, like you say, they've got roads, you haven't. They've got this, you haven't. But you're still supposed to be grateful for, for that, or for them having been there. And people don't want to talk about it. They want to shove it under the carpet. And it was very illuminating, I think, reading your book, having it there in 4K and seeing the actual documented evidence rather than the stuff you hear about, but the documented evidence that this is what they did. What was the most shocking thing for you about it, about writing?
um so a lot of it was shocking, a lot of it was pretty horrifying, a lot of it was like very maddening. I had to read accounts of some really, really horrific stuff, um, like during the colonial era, during the fight for independence. And I think what was shocking is that it was rendered in
Hmm.
4K, that there was a wealth of documents where people very proudly recorded exactly what they had plundered down to the object and also where it was sent and who had it. Like, so it was possible for me to trace an object from like a court, like the court of a king in Western Ghana, to like the British Museum pretty seamlessly.
Mm.
Like, it wasn't at all complicated. Like, it just took some research. That's what surprised me. Because when people talk about colonialism, it is in such like abstract terms, and it is usually more of an argument. It was important for me to have like specifics about what that like
Yeah.
smells, tastes, feel like, looks like, what the actual acts were that like made up this thing. Um, and so the fact that people were so proud of their crimes,
Yeah.
and wrote like incredible accounts in like in like such rapturous tones, like, and also that those accounts weren't used more frequently, that I hadn't seen them before, that people didn't regularly pull them up and be like, yeah, that's where that went, that's where that exact chunk of wealth went, like you can go see it.
Yes.
That is what surprised me the most, I think.
And it's
um
constant need to hide it and pretend that for the layperson, as it were, to sort of say, "Oh, it's a long time ago. Get over it." It's not a long time ago. It's still ongoing,
no,
and we've got
like
the
if the
evidence of it.
object still exists, you can still give it back.
Yes. Well.
It wasn't
Yeah.
so long ago that it's crumbled to dust.
Yes.
And it wasn't so
Exactly.
long ago that it is not worth anything to you. Like, you're still holding on to it because it is.
Yeah. Let me break off now to ask the audience's questions. I want to make sure that they get to ask their questions, and I'll come back to my questions hopefully. Okay, so we've asked Theo's question already. Julia asks, "What made you want to tell this story in book form, and do you have any plans to adapt it? I'm guessing into TV or film or something."
I wanted to tell it in book form, mainly because even when it was a caper, I do a lot of research, and Um, I write at great length, and I'm thankful for my editors because this would have been like a messy digression-filled manuscript if not for them. Um, but like, so I also knew that there was going to be like a level of historical research, and I wanted to make that easy to access for like other researchers in the future. So I wanted to be able to do things like reference things really thoroughly and also go on at length about very specific parts of history, and that doesn't, like, nobody wants to listen to like a podcast that's just me reading 30 references for one chapter. Like, nobody wants to watch it like a TV show or documentary where like I go to the British Library to pull up one document, and then they like roll up a cart and I'm like, is that everything I ordered? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, crap. And then I read the whole thing and then I realize the reference I was looking for was wrong because it's the wrong magazine. And so now I've done 3 days of research for nothing. Like, that doesn't really lend itself to.
No. But the story that you've told the story now. So would you be interested in adapting it, you think,
Yeah, I think
the
obviously
documentary?
in like more appropriate and like TV and or radio appropriate forms, I'd love to adapt it. Yeah.
Okay, Alice asks, will your next project be non-fiction, and have you found anyone else to cover?
My next project will probably be non-fiction because of my previously like addressed addiction to doing research. Um, I I haven't found someone else to cover, but largely because what I rely a lot on like the serendipity thing I was talking about of like going to places and talking to people and finding out about stuff that way. So like the way I found out about this was like my mum sending me a WhatsApp message and chatting it up with people. And the problem there is that like it happens to me. Like the story
Yeah,
finds me and then it chases me around and then it's the thing that I am obsessively doing, but I can't like manufacture that. Like,
yes.
yeah. And so we
Okay.
will see.
Okay. He was able. Maria asks, he was able to survive for so long and so many changes of government within Ghana and internationally. Why do you think he managed to hold?
Um, I think in part because he knew how to read the room and he like was very good at knowing when it was time to disappear and when it was time to lay low and wait something out.
Yeah.
Um, and also because he remained well connected enough and he kept himself well connected enough that he could lay low until he saw an opening and use that opening. So like when he was imprisoned, like after the trial in 1979, he just like lay low until like there was a coup and he saw an opening and he had connections enough to get him out of jail. And then they sprung him out on like ridiculous terms. Yeah, so he was just very good at reading the room and well connected enough to like use those connections when he could.
Yeah. Okay. Owen asks, was it difficult finding people who interacted with him? But we've already asked that. But the rest of his question is, it seemed a lot of people were still loyal to him and the trust at the end of the book.
Yeah, like I said, still loyal to this day. There are still people who expect to be paid out. There's still people encouraging the government of Ghana to like look into whether this fund exists. Um, yeah, people are still incredibly loyal to both him and the trust.
Yeah. Bron asks, where did all the money go? Did it just fund his lifestyle? Because
This
he
was
got a lot of money there. He had a lot of money.
a lot of money. Like I said, it's hard to tell exactly how much because a lot of people overstated their investments. A lot of the investments were never recorded at all. Like the best estimate we have is from Philadelphia, and that was for 300 million. And we know those were dodgy numbers. Um, the thing is, the investors mostly funded his lifestyle. Like they paid for the hotels, they paid for the houses, they paid for shopping trips, they paid for the travel. Like there were like I saw um like accounts of investors talking about like being down to their last credit card and not knowing if they could fund another trip. Um and so it is very unlikely that he spent much of the money he gathered because again, this was supposed to go to like fulfill like the conditions like set out in the trust document. And as far as I can tell, nobody really knows where that money went. Lots of people have theories that it was either extorted from him when he was on house arrest, or stolen. Few people think he isn't dead at all, and he's like in Brazil living it up with this money.
Which wouldn't be surprising, but then it would be because he loved being in front of everybody. So I don't think he would have been able to.
I don't know. Like he asked a couple of people towards the end. He was like, "Should I just take my money and go to Brazil?" Um,
Oh,
oh.
okay. There's a plot twist. There's a plot twist. I didn't see it coming. Um,
Um, so yeah,
oh,
nobody knows. It's like the last big mystery of all of this. Like nobody knows where the money is at all.
wow.
Yeah.
Fran says, I'm in two minds about John. Some of it is so unbelievable that it's astonishing that anyone ever brought into the tale. But on the other hand, it feels like he truly believed he could deliver and took everyone on the journey with him. Do you think he believed his own story?
I think to a certain extent he had to believe it to sell it that convincingly to so many people. over such a long period of time. Um, but on the other hand, like he tried so many times to make good or make good enough that he could provide people with like money or power or access. Like he tried with running the company, he tried with running for president, he tried to like jockey himself into a position where he could like make his investors just happy enough that he could not go legit, but like give them enough to shut them up. So he clearly knew what he was doing was a con. But he too, I think, felt like at the very heart of it, there was a kernel of truth and like a big question that needed answering. Um, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, Yuan asks, did you uncover anything that didn't make it into the book? And I apologize if I said your name wrong then.
So many things. Um, Nothing like outrageous or shocking. Well, no, there were a few things where the lawyers were like, no. Um, there was some really fun stuff. Like there was one of the like stories, which I think is apocryphal, but I'm not sure, that
Don't tell us
people,
anything if it's going to get legal problems.
yeah, no, I'm avoiding any of the things
Okay,
lawyers were
great.
like, please do not, because I
Yeah,
would not like to be sued.
no,
I don't think any of you want to be implicated.
no,
No.
not at all. Really wouldn't.
Um, so yeah, this was a story people told over and over and over again. I just couldn't stand it up. But there were lots of different versions of this as well. But the story was that Playmazer took a stool when he was in Ghana, like a regular stool, and he soaked it in weed bitters, which is like um marijuana steeped in alcohol. Soaked the stool for ages and ages and ages, so it just like stank of marijuana. And then he took it through customs at Heathrow. And obviously, like the sniffer dogs were like, this is drugs. And he was like, this is a sacred stool. You cannot destroy it. It's sacred to me. It's sacred to my people. It's worth a great deal of money. And obviously, they have to destroy it to find the drugs because it's a stool. So they crack it open. There's nothing there. And so they then apparently, depending on who's telling it, had to pay him like a huge amount of compensation. But also subsequently, when he passed through Heathrow, even if the sniffer dogs pick something up or something looks shady, he they didn't ask him about it. And so he was able to smuggle stuff through.
It's quite
And
brilliant, really.
yeah, that was probably like the most told story that I couldn't stand up.
Oh, it's a shame, really. If it's true, it's brilliant.
If it's
Okay.
true, it's brilliant. Yeah.
Uh, Beth asks, has writing the book made you more cynical about the world?
Um, Especially when I was reading through the more disturbing accounts of things that happened during the colonial era, during the coups, in the 1980s, especially. Um, I felt it would. I didn't realize the scale of brutality and devastation. And also, I didn't realize how little of it had been like accounted for, how little restitution there had been, how like nobody had anything close to justice in any of these situations. And so there was definitely a time when I was like heartbroken and enraged. But then I just had so many like encounters with people um when I was out doing research, even when I was like stuck in London during lockdown, and I'd go out and I'd like tell the odd person I would interact with through masks about what I was working on. Like occasionally, like I'd run into someone who like knew of Blameza and had stories from the time and remembered when he was running for president and promising people jobs and money. And I'd be like, that is, and they would have like memories and stories that they would tell me. I just I met so many remarkable people researching this, and I heard so many incredible stories, like the lives people had lived, the things they had done, like good and bad. And like the snapshots of the world that they shared with me, like Philadelphia in the 70s sounded like an insane place. London in the 80s, like Accra in the 60s, all these like wonderful worlds I wouldn't have had access to if it wasn't for all these people. Like
Yeah,
that gave me faith in like there being a million more stories out there that aren't told, and like also in humanity, because nobody had to interact with me, nobody had to tell me any of this, but
yeah,
they did.
fantastic. And what are you working on right now? Asked Steph.
um I am doing more like research. There were lots of like random rabbit holes that I only partially went down when I was researching this, and things that I found um, that I am just digging around into. And I'm hoping like being out in the world and digging through archives brings me to my next character.
Okay, well, I hope so too. Right, my final question is going to be: do you think, having written this book, that you would be a good con artist?
Oh my God, no, it's so hard. It is so, you have to be charming and suave and convincing. You have to remember what stories you told which person. You have to be not squeamish about taking someone's like last $100. And like, if the con is big enough, you have to be willing to like do some really, really disgusting things to get on and align yourself with some really god awful people to keep yourself powerful enough to like further the con. Like your like cute little con crime starts to get tied up in like larger and more heinous crimes. That's like the only way you can survive.
Yeah,
Um, and I just don't have the stomach for any of that.
yes,
Um, Yeah. Also, like, so much money, so much confusion, so much like grasping greed. I think like
yes,
as much fun as a ton of money sounds like, it also sounds like overwhelming to have that be like my entire being and my entire purpose.
you have to be a completely different person all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like you say, keep a track of, can't keep track of lies. That's why I try to tell the truth all the time, because you can't keep track of all the lies you've told. Be like, oh, I told you that, did I? Oh, sorry.
I meant it was an entirely different thing. Yeah. No, it sounds like hard work. It sounds like a skill set I just don't have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ah, well, that's a shame, I think.
Yeah, no,
Um,
I'd love to make a ton of money for almost nothing.
it's quite hard work though. It's a different type of work.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, okay. Well, it's been lovely talking to you, Yeppy.
Thank you
Um,
so
and thank you
much.
so much. It's a wonderful, wonderful book. And if you get a chance to pick it up, I do hope you get a chance to pick it up. You're on the socials, aren't you? Most of the socials. So if you follow Yeppy on social media, you can tell her or email her through her website how wonderful her book is, because I think it is absolutely brilliant. And I will be recommending it to a lot of people. And I think a few people would find it in their Christmas stockings this year. And well, thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us. I just want to remind you that next month's book club selection is Shirley Jackson's The Haunting of Hill House, which sounds actually really brilliant. And yes, so thank you, everybody. And good night.
Thank you
Goodbye.
so much. Thank
Thank
you
you
for
so much,
listening.
Yippee.
What a pleasure.
Bye.